بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصر جندك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي فلسطين كلها وفي اليمن وفي لبنان وفي السودان وفي إيران وفي أفغانستان وفي كشمير وفي الصين وفي روسيا وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا وحبيبنا وشفينا وطبيب قلوبنا ونور أعيننا والسرور قلوبنا ومأوانا وملجانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته وعترته وأنصاره وأعوانه وإخوانه وأصحابه وأحزابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين. Okay, so we had been reading this review of a book by Anthony Bruno, Facticity and the Fate of Reason after Kant. We had just read last time the opening paragraph, so we'll just go through it again. To preserve the unrestricted authority of reason in the moral sphere, Kant argued that the scientific use of reason yields knowledge of appearances only, not of things as they are in themselves. So we sort of tried to question this in our last session, especially the reading of it as a trade-off. This trade-off sparked both consternation and controversy. Among Kant's contemporaries, the most pertinent or prominent G. Fichte set the terms for German idealism, the project of constructing a consistent rational system on the basis of Kant's Copernican return. In the second half of the 9th century, neo-Kantian philosophers, so basically we focused on this claim first, and I wasn't much convinced by this, but probably we don't need to add anything to what we did last time on that score. In the second half of the 19th century, the neo-Kantian philosophers pushed back against this idealism. Which idealism? Fichte's idealism. As did Dilthey's hermeneutics and the Brentano-inspired phenomenological movement without fully escaping its pull. Its pull meaning the pull of idealism. Underlying these developments, Anthony Bruno shows in his splendid new book was Anxiety or the Fate of Reason. Okay, the Fate of Reason is actually a title of, I think, one of Weiss's book. Very enjoyable book, actually. The first, it's called the fate of reason, something like that. The past 50 years have seen an efflorescence of studies that interpret the yield of these post-Kantian takes on a science of intelligibility. Um, I don't know what these two refers to. I don't see any footnotes. And I don't see any one either. Oh, okay. The past 50 years has seen, yeah, so it's, and Bruno's philosophical historical reconstruction of the path from Kant to Heidegger engages extensively with this literature. It's talking about contemporary. However, his choice of Fichte's neologism, facticity as Phil's conductor is quite original. So his guiding principle is facticity, concept of facticity. I wasn't sure what does he mean by facticity. Seems like he mean given, more like Sellersian facticity, but probably um, it will become clear as we read the review. Facticity is not equivalent to empirical facts. As expressed in proposition, facts have a rational structure. Facticity is in contrast a portmanteau for any element in a philosophy that appeared as a brute given or rationally ungrounded posit. So, what facticity mean is brute given. Facticity means it's brute given. More like Sellers, yeah, not brute given as a rationally brute given. What was the other thing he says? Facticity as brute given rationally. So brute given is basically mean if something is not rationally grounded, then it is brute given. So if something is there, if something exists and you don't have a rational justification for that, then is it brute given? I don't know. Facticity. So examples include Kant's rhapsodic metaphysical reduction of the categories and his undemonstrated claim that the faculties of sensibility and understanding are toto distincts. How can somebody say that metaphysical deduction is undemonstrated? Maybe his demonstration is not convincing to you, but you can't say that metaphysical deduction is a brute fact or presented as a brute fact, because metaphysical deduction is philosophical justification for the use of and use of categories and their numbers and all that. But this is a bizarre claim, I think, unless I don't understand what it's trying to say here completely. So, which is possible, obviously, because philosophical deduction for Kant. I mean, firstly, Kant was the first to concede that he had a great problems Um, he called it a matter of extreme difficulty. Kant, matter of extreme difficulty. Extreme difficulty. That is the deduction of categories. But to say that deduction is not successful doesn't mean that, or it is not in, entirely convincing, is not to say that Kant takes the distinction between understanding and sensibility or sensation as a brute fact. That's just, it seems to me, totally wrong reading. And generally in Kant's understanding Kant, there's a lot of leeway. But in this one, I mean, how can someone say that Kant takes the distinction between sensation and understanding as a brute fact is beyond me. Unless, of course, which is entirely possible. I don't understand that point here. We'll see. Obviously, he's talking here about metaphysical deduction, but he's talking about metaphysical deduction here, but there's no justification for restricting yourself to metaphysical deduction. Because if you are talking about the distinction between understanding and sensation, then it's related to transcendental deduction as well. And in transcendental deduction, Kant does provide justification for the distinction between understanding and sensation or sense experience. Because transcendental deduction has 3 stages. And in the first one, and the first stage of transcendental deduction, Kant's try to establish the legitimacy of the forms of intuition. That is space and time. And the argument there is that since since space and time, since object only appear to us by means of such pure forms of sensibility, space and time are legitimate pure intuitions. Pure intuitions. Which contain a priori, this is Kant's words, obviously, the conditions of the possibility of objects as appearance. So space and time, he pure forms of intuition, he establishes that. Whether it's successful or not, that's something else. Forms of intuition. And that proves that object of experience is different from object in itself, because thing in itself, because the object is actually a category as well, and even thing, but we're talking there about X. Object of experience is not the same as the thing in itself. So there he is actually making a distinction between faculty of sensibility and understanding as totally distinct. So he doesn't take faculty of space, faculty of sensibility and understanding as totally distinct as a brute fact, at least not in his own mind, but it's try to, and obviously the next two stages of transcendental deduction goes on to try to legitimate the same thing more fully. So irrespective of whether you think that Kant's attempt at this is successful or not, you can't claim that he starts with a distinction between sensibility and understanding as a brute fact. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. And second stage, obviously, he does the same with the categories of understanding. That is, there are a priori categories. We can't intuit or even think of objects without their use, and that provides the distinction between. Let's provide the basis for distinction between appearances and things and themselves. And obviously, in the review, they are not talking about the distinction between appearances, things in themselves, but rather about sensibility and understanding. But I think distinction between sensibility and understanding is a corollary of the transcendental deduction and metaphysical deduction, in the sense that that difference I think it's more elaborate in the sense that it requires a rejection of intuition, intellectual intuition. So you probably start with that intellectual intuition, and that does not take rejection of intellectual intuition is not taken as a brute fact. There's an argument for that, whether it's successful or not, and from that it follows that understanding sort of can't give us intuition. The intuition is given by sensation. Now those intuition must pass through form of pure intuition, which is space and time, and arguments are given for that. And at the third stage, obviously, you need a perception or eye accompanying, and not just subjective eye, but transcendental eye, organize the whole thing into organize information and organize knowledge, turning it into knowledge. So that's the basis of this distinction between sensibility and understanding. So I think it's not fair to say that Kant treat it as a brute fact. So I think from Kantian point of view, it's not is or at least Kantian conception of rational grounding is not a brute fact, but maybe from a Hegelian point of view, it is. Probably he is referring to that. Okay, let's stop here and we'll continue with that since it's an interesting issue. It's good to think about it. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.